Welcome to another episode of OneTAKE, a video series where I explore the future of work, life, education, and culture with experts and friends from all over. Today, I'm especially excited as we move away from RPA, a topic that's a safe place for me, to explore a topic that's both important and very personal: the future of work for women. In this episode, I spend time with author and industry leader Dr. Mary Key, who's an expert in the area of women in business and transformational leadership. Listen in as we discuss everything from her latest book, Seizing Success, to how I can be a positive influence on my own daughters and their future in the workplace. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this episode of OneTAKE as much as I did. Hello, OneTAKE listeners. Ian Barkin here. If you've followed OneTAKE so far, you see I've done a lot of discussions with friends in the robotic process automation space. But OneTAKE is meant to be so much more. We're examining technology, but also examining education and the dynamics of the future of work, the future of life, and the future of education. So I could not be more thrilled to have my next guest here. And without further ado, I want to introduce Mary Key. Mary, this topic that we're going to talk about is so interesting to, I think, to everybody. It's personally interesting to me. Before we get started and jump into questions, tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and then your motivations for writing a book that we'll talk more about.
Okay. Well, it's wonderful to be here, Ian. And
Great to
my
have you.
background has been consulting in the areas of leadership and organizational development. And I've pretty much done that my whole career. Unlike some people who want to become consultants later in their career, my big problem was being so young when I was a starting consultant that people wouldn't take me seriously. And that's kind of a theme with the book, too, Seizing Success, A Woman's Guide to Transformational Leadership, because women do have some unique challenges right along in their careers, whether they're in technology or in other fields, that can be daunting. I'm from Massachusetts originally. We've talked a little bit about that.
Yep.
And I'm still a Red Sox fan, even though I've lived in Tampa, Florida longer.
You have to be a Red Sox fan. I think
yeah.
it's required by law. Because
I
I,
think so.
too, having been born in Boston, am a Red Sox fan.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it just
there we go.
happens.
Yep.
And, yeah. So being born in New England, I always felt like a gypsy stole me, made me live in a cold climate. And so the chance to come to Tampa for work was a big one. So my first job out of graduate school was with a firm called Development Dimensions International, DDI.
Okay.
And they specialize in leadership development, and I got to travel around the world on somebody's expense account, which was very, very exciting.
Good planning.
And then it wore off a little bit, and of course travel became more difficult. And so I did join another firm after DDI. DDI moved their offices to Atlanta, and I work with them. They are called Achieve Global. The firm I worked with was an acquisition of Achieve Globals, and then I started my own practice. And in the work I did in my practice, when I first started out, I continued to work with Fortune 500 companies, but then one of my clients introduced me to Inc. magazine. So I helped Inc. set up CEO roundtables around the country, and I got to work with a lot of entrepreneurs, quite a few technology-based entrepreneurial companies. So that started this process, and what we did for Inc. is we helped them design and facilitate these roundtables where you'd bring together a brain trust of people who ran their own companies and wanted to build them.
Okay.
And the dynamic of It's Lonely at the Top was really the organizing factor for that.
Okay.
And so fast forward to now, I noticed that women in leadership roles, especially when they were at higher levels in their organizations, whether they were the CFO or the COO or the senior VP of global marketing, whatever,
Right.
they really needed to have a place where they could go and not be perfect and float ideas and get feedback. And I think women have a tendency to feel like they have to have their idea developed when they're within their organization sometimes, and a little less willing to take risks. So I started something called the Key Women's Leadership Forum in 2014,
Okay.
and it's really taken off. And the focus is really to bring people together and have this not only opportunity to share ideas and practices, but to also spend some time aligning mind, body, and spirit with what's purposeful for them.
Okay.
And so the book really came from the work with the women's groups.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
my past work as an executive coach and working with leadership development programs.
Again, welcome here. I'm thrilled that we're having this discussion. Like I said, somewhat intentional departure from some of the area I've spent a lot of time talking about, but one I'm really excited about. You mentioned the book. I have it right here. We will put links to it so people can see it. Seizing Success, and as you mentioned, the subtitle is A Woman's Guide to Transformational Leadership. Could you give us your definition of what you mean by transformational?
Sure. A transformational leader is someone, male or female, who has a compelling vision, engages people in that vision, and is open and willing to transform themselves as well as lead the transformation and change going on.
Okay.
So many times, a more traditional leader, again, whether it's male or female, doesn't always have the courage. They want to control it. So they want people to change and do what they want.
Sure.
But a transformational leader is someone who engages, realizing that with that inspiring vision and all the other things they do, how they frame things for people,
Right.
how they engage them, how they coach them, how they develop them, those are going to take everybody in a direction no one's been in before.
Okay.
So they don't know. So it's a transformation.
I am clearly not a woman, but read the whole thing and found it to be both sort of inspiring and useful. And I'll call out one area that resonated with me right at the beginning. So you've got this chapter on growth strategies, and I'll read the 5 growth strategies, but want to explore those with you a bit.
Sure.
So 1 was purge perfectionism. 2, take risks and act. 3 is act as if and let go. 4, cultivate a growth mindset. And 5, use the power of intention. And so, as I mentioned, I am not a woman, but I found those to be extremely sort of informative, useful, and things that could be valuable to me and in my career. So, do you find that there's nuances to those lessons that apply differently to men than to women for the sake of this book and for the sake of just coaching?
I do.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. All of those strategies are very applicable to anyone
Okay.
who really has an interest in growing
Right.
and raising the bar for themselves.
Right.
So for women, purging perfection is really a little more challenging because in general, again, I'm talking generalities,
Sure.
women are brought up a little bit differently. So you might recall that when you were growing up, maybe, your parents were happy that you were doing okay in school and you'd show up and,
Right.
maybe every now and then you get in trouble. And often
Never.
there is a different standard for young girls.
Sure.
And some of them really get addicted to being perfect because that's when they get a lot of recognition.
Okay. Interesting.
And so, the strategy on perfectionism really deals not only with that, because we all, as human beings, some of us suffer from it, others not, but many people do. But women tend to have that need, and it does interfere with how they do things.
Right.
So if you second guess yourself because you want it to be perfect, you don't apply for jobs that maybe you have most of the qualifications for because you're not done yet with your current job.
Right.
Those types of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a theme I try to live by, which is the sort of perfect is the enemy of the good, and just get on with it. And so I can see that if you're committed to perfection, and it really does that sort of it steers you, but also binds you to finish tasks. Then you don't sort of barrel forward and move on to the next thing and the next thing.
Right.
So, interesting.
And acting as if is a great tip for everyone. So many times we don't challenge ourselves enough. We don't frame what's going on in such a way that, hey,
Sure.
if we make a mistake, or, I'm going to project the level of confidence I want to see myself have.
Right.
And that's a gradual process for different people. Everybody has different growth strategies for that in terms of how long it might take them. But I think many times we can get stuck not feeling like we're deserving. And let me give you an example
Okay.
from technology as well. There's a concept you might be aware of. It's called the Impostor Syndrome, where people are in a role and they don't feel they deserve to be there.
Right.
And then if the world finds out that just because they got promoted, just because they got accolades, the world finds out who they really are.
Right.
They'll be shocked. So the problem for many women, especially women in technology, they suffer from the imposter syndrome more. Now, it can be an ongoing syndrome, which is more severe,
Sure.
or it can be based on the circumstances. So I may be working in one workplace, and then I go to a highly automated place,
Right.
place that uses bot technology a lot, and I feel like I need to ask questions. I'm not really sure, so I start getting nervous about myself, and then people start saying, "Hey, you're doing really well," and it's kind of like, yeah.
Sure.
And
sure.
so that imposter syndrome
Sets in.
plays out,
Yeah.
and that does affect how you project yourself.
Right.
And whether or not you can maintain acting as if, because your stress level gets really high.
Right. Now it's interesting you say that as I relate it to the last few years that I've spent in a tech-related industry, because, as you say, it's automation. The events, the companies, the conferences, the teams you find are generally more men than women, and so and a lot of this relates back to just the education and the coursework and the sort of the career trajectories chosen, but the reality is still very, very sort of clear that there are far fewer women in the field, and that's not a good thing. We need to find ways to encourage more women to be in it. We've got the company that I helped start had some tremendous team members who happened to be women, but they were extraordinary in their contributions they made to the company and to the industry. So I'm personally quite passionate about finding ways to solve for that disparity.
Well, I was viewing a vlog. I think PwC
Sure.
produced it, and the interviewer was talking to a woman who's the CEO of a company called WP Engine,
Okay.
and also one of the people that basically helps, like a tech support person. That's a woman, and she came from teaching
Okay.
to technology. And so she had to go through all her different certifications
Yes.
to be of assistance to their customers.
Sure.
And then here you have this woman CEO running the company, and they both shared their experiences, and they were identical. That initial feeling of maybe I'm an imposter,
Interesting.
hesitant, and there's some reasons why women feel this way more. And let me give you an example. And
Please.
the women listening, I think, will identify with this. A woman can be in a room with other people. They can be peers or mixed groups, and she can bring up an idea or a suggestion. Nobody hears it. 10 minutes later, guy says the same thing.
Comes back
Everybody
again.
goes nuts.
Right.
That
Right.
is a common problem
Okay.
that women have, and one of the reasons that some of the strategies in the book are particularly helpful.
Right, and you mentioned that there's an example of a woman that you were coaching who suggested that happened to her, and you're right. We need to be sensitive to that, and I as a male in the workplace need to pay attention to that and see if it's happening. So
Yeah.
Before we move on to the next question, I'll share actually sort of a personal anecdote, but I was reading your book in preparation for this discussion. And,
I was impressed with all the highlighting.
well,
Yeah.
I just, but more than simply highlighting and tabbing it, I recently moved my family to Tampa for a new role, and so as a result, my children had to start at new schools where they knew nobody, and so it's a new environment. And I actually used one of your lessons from that chapter of acting as if, because I was working with my 9-year-old daughter who is very nervous about being a new student in this class and not knowing the routines.
Sure.
And so I workshopped with her being just more bold and just pretending as if she understood the routine and was more comfortable in class, because that will give her the courage to then ask the questions that she needs to figure out just where she needs to go for the next session, or just where her classroom was. And it was interesting. She actually came back and played back to me how she thought of acting as if when she was in school, and it made her more comfortable. So thank you.
Oh, that's
So,
terrific.
yeah,
I
yeah.
love that.
So
I love that.
It did help.
It
It helped
really
a
helps.
9-year-old, yes, to acclimate to a new school.
Well, and that's what I know you're a dad, and there are a lot of women in your life, and it's so important to start early with things like that and be less concerned about someone being nice and perfect and more concerned about how can I project myself in the world in such a way that it feels good to me and people can accept it. They can hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and as you mentioned, so I came from a family of strong women. My mother was a physician at a time when that wasn't as common. My wife is far more educated and capable than I am. My sister is both a PhD and a lawyer, and so it's sort of natural in my environment. But I also now find myself being the father of two young girls, and so what advice would you have for me? Because I think so much of this does start, I mean, really from birth, as far as preparing and getting people comfortable with behaviors, but then also sort of expressing themselves, what schooling they pursue. So what should I do to be a better dad of two young women?
Build confidence by allowing them to make mistakes and sometimes celebrate those mistakes. They're learning opportunities.
Yes.
As opposed to, I didn't do my homework and I got a D. And okay, that's not good.
Yeah.
And you're going to be grounded, but let's take a look at that.
Smile,
what was the thinking there?
My wife would not let them get away with that mistake. But
well, maybe that's extreme for her, but little girls are not allowed to make mistakes as much.
Right.
I think the other thing that's hard for young girls is the fact that, like, if you ask, what are the characteristics of an effective leader? So what are some that you come to mind for you?
Well, being bold, decisive, stating their point of view, and corralling the team and energizing and aligning the resources and the assets and the people that you have.
Being action-oriented,
right? Yep.
Taking risks.
Yes.
All of those things. When you line up those characteristics, they line up with how we see men in general.
Right.
And again, I'm just talking generalities.
Sure.
When you take a look at a woman being that way, it gets complicated.
Right.
Because women are also, they're supposed to be nice, they're supposed to be collaborative, they're supposed to be sensitive to what's going on in the room.
Right.
So these things don't fit.
Right.
And I think educating your daughters and helping them understand that, because it is confusing.
Right. It's what I find somewhat challenging is in educating them about certain things, the knowledge of a thing raises the question about the lack of the thing, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But so one particular topic came up about women's suffrage, right? And so you're teaching young girls about the passing of a law that enabled women to vote, which by sheer virtue of that fact meant that there was a time when they couldn't.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you teach them lessons about sort of the advancements and the accomplishments and not have this subversive concept that they weren't allowed to drive or vote or do so many things prior to the passing of those laws. I struggle with it.
I don't blame you, because the truth is, it is a diversity issue.
Right.
Just like with, racial issues and people being enslaved, women basically were at the effect of their husbands. They couldn't own their own property.
Right.
They things could not be willed to them.
Yeah.
There are so many restrictions, and that's part of the history.
Yes.
And if you can make that more of a motivator than like you're downtrodden,
Sure.
and look at where we are now. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote this book is that I wanted to compile all the things I wish someone had taught me 25 years ago.
Interesting.
As well as to take advantage of the current time. We've never had 25% of Congress being female.
Right.
Now, I'm not excited with how Congress performs in our
Right.
country right now, but because there's gridlock. But
Yes. That's another episode.
yes,
Sure.
another.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
Right. And the Me Too movement, and things are being exposed
Right.
and handled differently
Right.
in a relatively short period of time.
Sure.
I'm involved with 2020 Women on Boards to get 20% of all publicly traded boards to have women on them, because once you have that diversity, it enhances productivity.
Right.
It enhances creativity.
Right.
So many things that come from that.
Well,
But you need a critical mass, which people have found to be about 3 women.
Okay.
So you can't have a token woman on the board.
Right. Okay.
So they have to hang around in little clumps.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's a good segue to another question, and you touched on this earlier. I will prove that my tabs are both colorful and useful.
You like yellow.
I do. Well, we ran out of other colors. You'd referred to traits that are associated, leadership traits that are often associated as male traits. But in your book, you reference another book that's called the Athena Doctrine.
Yes.
And I found this fascinating because, I'll let you explain it, but ultimately, I guess the gist is that the traits that are necessary for companies to actually transform, to actually do well, and as you said, to inform board decisions or inform any sort of transformation, actually are more often associated with traits that women are characterized as having. So expand on that. Because
Okay.
I'm really excited about that concept.
Sure. Well, the Athena Doctrine, just by its sheer size, was an amazing study. These two male researchers went around the world and basically, through a variety of different techniques, identified what are the traits of the leader that people around the world
Sure.
want now and in the future.
Right.
So the next generation of
Right.
leaders. And they did a factor analysis and found that there were 16 traits that came up,
Okay.
only 2 of which are identified with male masculine traits,
Right.
decisiveness, which we've talked about, and resilience, the
Okay.
ability to handle things coming at you.
Okay.
And the rest were all feminine traits. Now,
Right.
it doesn't mean that men and women can't both display them, because
Certainly.
that's what the globe wants.
Right.
Despite some of the things going on, that's what they're saying they want. So those are things like collaboration, a we orientation versus an I orientation, the ability to empathize, self-awareness, all of those things that are softer skills.
Okay.
And as we look at the future of the workforce and animate or automate more things, it becomes even more important to have these soft skills, and you'll have more time to be able to display them if you do that. So an example of a soft skill is how do I become visionary? That's a trait of a transformational leader. We have to have an inspiring vision.
Right.
So taking time to not only get in touch with your vision, but to pull that vision
To
and
energize
engage people
others.
in it
Right.
and get other people rallying around it
Right.
is really, really critical.
Interesting. Well, and I love this distinction too, just because and again, this is through my lens, but there's so much energy focused on the role that technology will play in transformation of enterprises and the digital transformation,
Right.
which everyone is saying is imperative and they're focusing on. But it's somewhat missing the plot because I think, and want to hear your point of view on it, that the technology is a means to an end, and the end is enabling people to be better, to be more empathetic or more useful or more visionary or more purpose-driven in their enterprises. So it really is, and your book is about transformational leadership that could truly be applied to this entire scope of discussion.
Absolutely.
Around how enterprises are changing.
Yeah, and not just women, because transformational leaders take time to develop others.
Sure.
And of course, millennials lead faster than anybody else. We're such a brain drain because we're not honoring some of their ideas.
Right.
I was at a meeting. I belong to this group called the CEO Council, and one of the speakers was talking about a young guy that joined a big company, and the CIO had certain ways he wanted to do things. And this person had a great idea, and consistently he was told, no. So he said, look, I'll work on this on my own time.
Interesting.
And they couldn't come to agreement, so he did that anyway.
Yeah.
He sold his business to Google for multiples of millions,
Yeah.
and left that business.
Well,
And so
last
there's a
laugh.
real danger
Yes.
and I wrote this blog very recently on the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And so the CIO is all about efficiency.
Right.
Being about effectiveness, that's what a transformational leader does, but there's
right.
no guarantee about your return on effort. You may put effort into something, and it may take you a long time to figure out the right strategy, but it becomes effective.
Right.
You'll have more time to work on the effectiveness part
Right.
if technology takes care more of the efficiency part.
Routine and the
Yeah,
mundane. Exactly.
yeah. So it's how do you position that?
Okay. And sort of last question, because I think it actually relates to that too. There is some research that suggests that women will be impacted more so by automation. In the nature or the spirit of the research is effectively that a lot of roles that traditionally are held by women have a high degree of routine, rote, sort of automatable components to them. Have you seen that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's evident in some professions. I mean, for example, more women are in healthcare, but at the lower levels of healthcare.
Right.
Not necessarily a doctor like your mother was.
Okay.
Okay, but there's a lot of automation that takes the place of, what a LPN or a CA do in their jobs.
Sure.
And so, yes, and so what else does that person need to learn to do?
Right.
So I think there's an opportunity to learn, but I think women need to be exposed to what are some of the options.
Exactly. Well, and then I think then if you, as you said, if you free them from some of the efficiency elements, they can focus on being the transformational leaders in their roles and in their enterprises that they're preconditioned to be good at because of their natural skill set.
And I do want to clarify that when I use the term leader, it's that you have followers, so you don't necessarily have to manage people.
Sure.
You can be a thought leader, you can be a leader of a team, and then, of course, you can be a leader in an organization and become the CEO. So it's really about leadership at all levels.
Perfect.
And what women really want to do.
Great. Well, Mary, thank you so much for coming, for spending your time with us, for writing this book, for giving me that best practice that I've used on my family and helped us in a new school and in a new environment. Really appreciate it. And any last thoughts in our discussion on what leaders need to be and how enterprises need to embrace the strong women in their organizations?
Well, I'd like to come back to the thing I was talking about when I was talking about my bio. So
Sure.
I work with these CEO groups, and then I started working with these women's groups. And in my book, Seizing Success, A Woman's Guide to Transformational Leadership, I actually share the secrets of how women can pull together their own mastermind group and really be able to have that support and test out ideas and become more courageous in what they're doing. And I think that that's really, really an important part of how women in particular get support.
Perfect. Okay. Great. We should we'll include a link to resources or information
Sure,
about that.
absolutely.
And listeners who are interested can find it.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you so much.